A child is taught what to learn, when to study, when to sit still, when to speak, when to rest, when to try again. For 12 years, sometimes 15, adults stay close to the child, telling, correcting, scheduling, guiding every step of growth. And then one day, all of that coaching ends. Does the child know what to do next? How to notice they're tired and rest without being told? How to pick a direction and follow it without being assigned? How to look at themselves honestly without someone standing there and pointing it out? For most, the answer is no, not because something is wrong with the child, because nobody ever taught them self development. The child was developed but never developed themselves. And here's the part most people do not realize. Development, as most people understand it, ends when the school ends, when the adults step back. Self development does not. Self development does not end, not after school, not after university, not ever. Self development continues for the rest of their lives. Just think about it. A teenager who reaches for the phone and gets pulled into the endless scrolling because nobody ever taught them how to direct their own attention. A college student who suddenly experiences freedom for the first time, gets off the leash, and disappears into the partying and the drinking because their whole life somebody else corrected their behavior. And later, as an adult who keeps waiting for motivation that never comes because their whole life somebody else told them what to do and when to start. These are not failures of intelligence. These are children who were always told what to do and never taught to take responsibility for their own actions. This is the gap nobody talks about. The last conversation was about the gap between education and development. The gap is real and it's costing children everything. But there is a second gap sitting right behind it between development and self development. Children spend years learning how to follow instructions, but almost nobody teaches them how to make their own decisions, correct their own behavior, plan for the future, manage their own time, and recover when something goes wrong. And this is the part that has to be said clearly before any of the rest can be explained. This is not about removing school. This is not about pulling children away from parents and teachers. This is about missing important layers in a child's development. Everything adults do for a child has to slowly become something the child does on their own. Those are the layers no one is building yet. Self development does not mean a child grows without guidance. It means guidance slowly becomes ownership. So, where does the self development actually begin? It begins with self care. Before a child can analyze anything, choose anything, or pursue anything, the child has to be able to take care of themselves. Eat, sleep, dress, manage their own space, handle their own emotions. Self care is not a chore list. It is the first time a child experiences themselves as an independent person capable of taking care of human being themselves and of taking responsibility for their own actions. And when a child can really do that, something else follows naturally. The child becomes a real helper at home, not from a task assigned, but because the child actually understands what caring for a space and a family looks like. That is already a developed human being at 5 or 6 years old. The next layer is self analysis. And most adults are still figuring this out at 40, not because they are incapable, because nobody ever taught them how to analyze their own behavior. What does self analysis actually sound like in a child? It is when a child notices their own emotional state and asks the right question out loud. Am I overwhelmed? Do I need rest? Did I handle that badly? Am I proud of this? Do I learn better this way? Why am I angry at myself? Did I fail because I am bad at this or because I need more practice? Those are just some of many honest questions a child can ask themselves. And each one said out loud already begins to change the child's behavior. The exercises to teach it already exist. The tools exist. Nothing about this is new. It just has not been put together into one process that every child can actually understand and follow. But self analysis only works when the child has the right to act on their own. This is what I call the right to choose. It does not mean giving them complete freedom, it means giving them the right to choose and providing them with meaningful and useful choices. This is giving a child what I call the limited choice. For example, at home, Would you like to wash the dishes or wipe the table? Or at school, would you like to work alone today or with a partner? Would you like to start with reading or with math? Two children can do the exact same activity, but one is following instructions, the other is taking responsibility for their own choice and actions. That changes everything. A child who studies because someone is watching and a child who studies because they genuinely care are developing two completely different minds. And that is where the whole structure has to shift from teacher-centered to child-centered. In teacher-centered approach, an adult decides what a child will learn, when, how, and for how long. The child follows. In a child-centered approach, the child has a real right to choose what to explore, when to go deeper, when to rest. Adults guide, the child decides. This is how child first practices critical thinking. And when a child has the right to choose, what does the child choose? Whatever matters to them in that moment, their interest, their curiosity, their passion, their purpose. Does an adult enjoy work where the purpose makes no sense? Neither does a child. When a child follows a genuine interest, that child experiences their own motivation as theirs, not borrowed, not assigned. And most important, a child understands the purpose and the consequences of their own decisions and actions. A child chooses math, takes as much time as needed, completes the task on their own, and feels proud and satisfied with the work accomplished. This is what self-development looks like in everyday life. A child who notices they are tired and chooses to rest instead of being told. A child who picks an interest and pursues it for weeks instead of being enrolled. A child who tries something, fails, and tries again without an adult narrating every step. A child who can say, I do not understand this yet, without shame, because not understanding yet is a part of growing. It is a part of learning. It is a part of self-development. These are small moments. They are also the entire point. None of this is a new idea. Maria Montessori named it over 100 years ago. Children choosing their own work, correcting their own mistakes, caring for their own environment, guiding their own learning. It exists, it works. It just never made it into the mainstream. And there is another side of the story. When self-development is missing, when a child is shaped entirely by adults, something quietly damaging happens. Then finished dreams and old fears of the generation above get passed down. For example, fear of failure. A parent who steers a child away from becoming an artist, afraid they will not make enough money, even if the child could have been the next Matisse. Fear of risk. A parent who was afraid to take a risk and start their own career pushes the child to stick to a steady 9 to 5 job, to never take initiative, to stay under the radar, even if the child could have been the next Steve Jobs. Pride in own achievement. A parent who became a doctor pushes the child to follow in their footsteps, when the child could have been the next Conan Doyle. Own denied failure. A parent who failed at becoming a doctor and called it impossible now keeps their child working in the family convenience store. It is rarely intentional. It is just what happens when self-development is not part of the picture. The child ends up carrying someone else's shape instead of discovering their own path, their own strength, their own passion, their own purpose in life. That is not development. That is inheritance. And here's what makes all of this so urgent. Almost 70% of children never receive professional help. They get lost, not because something is wrong with them, because they were never taught to follow their own developmental path. That is why so many teenagers swing through mood after mood. They know something is not right, but they cannot name it. They cannot understand it. They cannot make their own decisions. Most of them will never receive professional help. The ones who do get it as adults when it is already too late. A therapist can help an adult in their late 30s, 40s finally learn to look at themselves, manage their own emotions, make their own decisions. That work is real and valuable, but it is like pulling out a weed that was never supposed to grow there in the first place. And here's the connection. Almost 70% of adults today are living with childhood traumas. Is that a coincidence? But it does not have to be this way. Everything a therapist walks an adult through at 40 could have been built at 5. The moment the child starts to talk, the moment emotional development moves into logic, There is no reason to wait until a crisis forces an adult to catch up in a panic mode on what could have been built at 5. The only reason this is not already happening is that no one has built the method. There is no step-by-step process a child can actually follow, no named steps, no learning material that treats self-care, self-analysis, communication, critical thinking, and problem solving as real subjects with real practice. Everything exists in pieces. Nothing exists as whole. That is what is being built right now at self-development systems, a method that is easy to understand and simple to follow, real steps a child can see, practice, and own, not a philosophy, a process. Because development was never supposed to be the end goal, self-development was. Educated or ready for life, guided through curriculum or self-directed through a lifetime, assigned what to learn or able to choose what to grow into. These are two completely different outcomes from the same curriculum, but a different approach. A child who is developed is a child ready for school. A child who is self-developing is a child ready for life, for 18, for 30, for 60. A child who can keep growing when the adults step back, who can take care of themselves, look at themselves honestly, choose their own direction, follow what actually matters, and keep doing all of that without needing someone standing next to them telling them how. That is the difference. And that is why the conversation has to move one more step further, not from education to development, from development to self-development. That one word changes everything, self. Because the goal was never to constantly manage children. The goal was to help them eventually manage themselves. A child who learns to develop themselves never stops growing. Not when school ends, not when parents step back, not ever. And those methods, the ones that take a child from self-care to self-analysis, through interest-based learning, all the way to becoming a person capable of shaping their own life, are being built right now at self-development systems. Step by step, for every child, affordable to every family. The right answers arrive when we start asking the right questions. How do we develop a child? Or when do we finally teach a child to develop themselves? Everything changes when the focus shifts from how we help teachers deliver learning material to how we help children to find their own self development path. If this matters to you, if you feel that something is off about how children are being taught, help it reach the parents and teachers. Follow the channel, leave a comment, share the video. Every voice counts. If not us, if not now, then who will do what had to be done a long time ago? Less pressure, more self development. Thank you and see you soon.